right. We will go ahead and call the special meeting of the Planning Commission to order. And Mr. City Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Alleman, Commissioner Stover,
Here.
Commissioner Wagstaff,
Here.
Vice Chair Nindell,
Present.
and Chairman Voss.
Present. Jim, will you lead us in the pledge?
Sure. Place your hand over your heart and repeat after me.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Jim. Sure. All right. Have we all had a chance to review the agenda? And if so, then could we get a motion for approval of the agenda?
I move we approve the agenda.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All right. Perfect.
Motion passes unanimously.
This looks like it's working good. All right. Public comments. Do we have any public comments?
No, we do not.
All right, we will go with that. Then we will begin on our public hearings. First item is a resolution recommending to the City Council to amend the general plan, land use policy plan, and zoning map to change designations on certain properties to address lands put into conservation, lands used for public use, and minor modifications to the downtown commercial designated boundaries and CEQA exemption. Staff report.
Yes, thank you. The City Council adopted the general plan update in May of 2020. Then in January 2022, an update to the map was adopted that included 6 parcels. As part of the effort to amend Title 17 zoning ordinance, staff has reviewed the general plan and zoning map for internal consistency with the zoning ordinance and consistency with each other. After doing so, staff is recommending updates to both maps. The proposed amendments consist of changing various parcels currently zoned rural residential to open space conservation, totaling approximately 346.3 acres, changing approximately 20 acres of various parcels from general commercial to downtown commercial on Pearson Boulevard from Cactus Drive to Choya Drive, and changing various parcels to public institution totaling approximately 23 acres, which are currently occupied by public uses such as City Hall, the post office, the library, the MSWD wastewater treatment plant, and the fire station. In accordance with the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act, the project is categorically exempt from environmental review pursuant to section number 15061B3 of CEQA because it can be seen with certainty that there is no possibility that the adoption of this resolution in question may have a significant effect on the environment. And with that, this is a recommendation to adopt a resolution of the Planning Commission recommending to the City Council to amend the general plan map, zoning map to change designations on certain properties to address lands put into conservation, lands used for public use, and minor modifications to the downtown commercial designation boundaries. That concludes my report. I'm available if you have any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, thank you. All right, entertaining questions of staff from the commission. Any commissioners have any questions on this specific item? No? All right. Then we will go ahead and open the public hearing and any public testimony on item number 1 here. Don't think we have any. So we will go ahead and close the public hearing. And there we go. I don't know why I use that. Planning Commission discussion and or a motion. Going once, going twice. Somebody want to do the motion? Don't all jump at it.
I'll make a motion To adopt a resolution of the Planning Commission recommending to the City Council to amend the general plan U.S. use policy plan map and zoning map to change designations on certain properties to address lands put into conservation, lands used for public use, and minor modifications to the downtown commercial designation boundaries.
I'll second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and vote.
Motion passes unanimously.
All righty. Now we will move on to item number 2, which is recommendation that the City Council adopt an ordinance amending chapter of Title 17, Chapter 17.08, residential districts. All right. Madam Community Development Director, Interim Community Development Director, however would you like to go for it?
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. This evening, we'll be reviewing only one chapter, Chapter 1708, Residential Districts. As you know, the city has received grant funding from HCD to assist in streamlining the review and approval process for housing projects. City staff has been working to update our zoning code with chapters that affect or influence residential districts to ensure streamlining can be accomplished, and also to ensure that our zoning code be aligned with state initiatives, our general plan, and our housing element. Here are some of the major highlights for the changes proposed in the residential districts chapter. We've reorganized the sections, grouping like sections together for usability. We've revised the districts in our purpose section to align with our general plan. In our development standards table, we created objective standards for Senate Bill 9 and substandard lots. We've added a minimum unit size for ADUs to be 300 square feet. We added a section for walls and fencing, which already currently exists in our code in another chapter. We've defined and added language for the accessory structures section for clarity and usability. We've removed a chapter within 1708-150 planned residential development to be moved to a separate chapter in the zoning code called planned development. We added definitions to be consistent with state definitions for home daycare and commercial daycare centers. And we've adjusted sections related to accessory dwelling units, junior accessory dwelling units, density bonuses, and single room occupancies to be aligned with recent state updates and regulations. In accordance with the provisions of CEQA, this project is categorically exempt from environmental review pursuant to section number 15061B3 of CEQA because it can be seen with certainty that there is no possibility that the adoption of this ordinance in question may have a significant effect on the environment. With that, staff is recommending an approval of a recommendation to the City Council to amend Chapter 1708 residential districts. That concludes my staff report. I'm available if you have any questions. And Nicole Christ from Terra Nova, who assisted in many of the changes, is also present as well.
Okay. We will go ahead to entertain questions of staff from commissioners. Any commissioners have any comments, questions? Okay.
Maybe. Anybody else?
Go ahead.
I guess this goes into the discussion section. Well,
You can do it now, or you can do a
I'll
discussion.
do it in the discussion.
Okay.
I'll do it in the discussion.
All right, then we will go ahead and we'll open the public hearing, and we will go to any public testimony, and we do have a guest speaker, Mr. Gerald McKenna. Thank you for coming.
Good evening, everyone. I live in Desert Hot Springs. I've been here 17 years. I love living here, but there are two things I don't like about Desert Hot Springs. One of them is road closures. We all know what that's about. And the second one is the poor quality of planning I see over and over. I'm just not comfortable with the planning department that sends urgency ordinances to city council for moratoriums on this, moratoriums on that. That's not planning. That's an absence of planning. I think it really needs to be rethought. I stood at this podium perhaps 3 years ago and watched a very egregious planning mistake being made when the property next to me, with 108 acres of residential, was rezoned commercial. And I went to the planning department and said, why is the staff supporting this? And this person I won't name did this. It's about money. It's about transient occupancy tax. It's not about quality of life. And quality of life, it should come first. And if you get the quality of life established, then the money will follow. Ask Beverly Hills. They know this. So the issue I have with this amendment to development standards, and it's not new, it crept in on the last general plan update, is a 30-foot height limit in residential, a single family, what used to be known as single family, now low density in residential. If you build a 2-story house in the middle of a block, excuse me, you take away the privacy of each of your next door neighbors and the property behind you and the properties next to that. And if you do enough of them, you end up with a street that looks like broken teeth. Up, down, up, down, up, down. It's horrible. It's a serious mistake. It reduces the value of property. I say this, I have personal interest here. I have 2 vacant properties next to my house. I bought one of them, but I can't buy the other. So I don't want to see a 2-story house go up there and say, oh, my kids can see you swimming naked in the pool. But you will have that over and over, all over the city, and you will have ugly, ugly streets. And I think it's an opportunity here to go back to the 20-foot height limit you've always had. When you build a 2-story house, you don't create an extra housing unit. You don't house another family. You just make a bigger house for a single family. So there's no upside for the public in this, and there's a lot of downside. So I'd like you to take a serious look at that and try and change it now. Thanks. I'll take questions if you have any.
No, I don't think we do, but I did take some notes here, and when we get into the discussion item, we'll talk about this, the 30-foot height thing.
Good.
I know at least 1 or 2 of the commissioners will have questions on the history of it as well.
Yeah, be happy to come
So
back.
we'll
and
make
talk.
sure to have some discussion on it.
All right.
So feel free to stay and
I just want to say thanks for coming out and
Yes.
saying your part.
yeah. All right. No more. Then we will go ahead and close the public hearing, and now it's time for planning commission discussion. So we heard 30 foot, and it was changed at some point. Do we know what the history is of that? Maybe why that was changed, or when it was changed, or what it was before?
So we had a general plan update in 2020.
Okay.
And our general plan reflects the 2-story and 30-foot height limit for residential low density, which our zoning code needs to be consistent with.
Okay.
And that's consistent with the state, or, I'm sorry, it needs to be consistent with the general plan.
Yeah, that is in our general plan, correct.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay. All right. Any other, did you have anything, Jim? Chris? Should I take a 10-minute break before you get started?
No. Good Lord.
All right, go for it.
Okay. So as usual, I got a list of questions and concerns, or just ways that I think that we could clean up the document. And I'm just going to go through from front to back. And I'm starting at 1708-020, which is the applicable regulations. And I'd like to see added into that State Bill 9, with parentheses SB 9, and the Night Sky Ordinance. Because I think those apply to all of everything within the chapter. Is that not correct?
So just for clarity, section 1708-020 applicable regulations it's a 1-sentence section.
Yes.
I guess when you make your motion, I can ask for clarity on how that should be added.
Well, I would just say add to the list. It's one sentence. It can remain one sentence, comma, State Bill 9, comma, the Night Sky Ordinance. Whatever the numbers are that correspond with that.
Ma'am, my concern with that kind of addition is that it is far from complete. We would also need to add, if you want to start adding state law, we would need to add AB 330, the density bonus law, the ADUs.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I see exactly what the commissioner is saying, Commissioner Stover is saying. State law always has to be complied with, so I wouldn't say, that's not exactly true. Local, we all have a good amount of authority for local jurisdiction. But what we can say in 17.08.020, so we're not specifically naming out everything. We would be here, I think, for eons if we had to name out every state law applicable. We could say comma and all applicable state law, maybe including but not limited to, maybe SB, Senate Bill 9 and, housing laws or something like that. But something to the effect of applicable state law, because again, not all state law is applicable. And then maybe add, including but not limited to one or two items.
Okay.
Well, how about applicable state law and the Night Sky Ordinance? I just want to get Night Sky Ordinance across all residential as opposed to only in multifamily.
So in Chapter 1740, which is Property Development Standards, which applies to all properties across the board, residential, commercial, industrial, and the like, they all need to comply with our Night Sky Ordinance. So that is addressed in a separate chapter.
Okay, so we don't need to be, it would be redundant to add it here?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So are you okay then, just for clarification, just because I'm writing it down, are you okay then with the language as is?
I'm okay with the language as long as Night Sky is
It's elsewhere.
covered with all of it, because I only see it explicitly mentioned in one section, and I'm just wondering why the difference, and if we need to be more explicit and just to make sure it covers all sections.
Okay, and I think we just heard that it does, and it's in a separate section. This is obviously a really big ordinance. I think it's like 50 some odd pages, 50 pages. So, okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, moving right along. Table 170802, building height. And as Mr. McKenna was just saying, my concern was also that, excuse me, we're allowing buildings that are going to be towering over their neighbors, especially with attached residential and the non-residential at 55 feet. And I'd like to see those limited to 45 feet and 3 stories specifically. And I wouldn't mind if we could do the 20 feet for Mr. McKenna as well, but I'm not sure if that doesn't sound like that's possible.
If I may answer that. Currently, we have both the 30-foot, as I heard from staff earlier, specifically called out in the general plan, and our zoning code, which is what we're looking at right now, must comply with our general plan. And the same exact thing happens with the 55 feet. It's on it's in the housing element on page 28 of the housing element of the general plan, and it specifically says 55 feet. So this ordinance must comply with the general plan. So the general plan would also have to be amended. The amendment is not before the body. We could make note of it that, if it were up to the entire council, we could make note of it once this goes up to city council. But even at city council, they would have to amend their general plan. So those changes are completely incongruent right now with the general plan.
And the other thing too is to be reminded is that under I think it's the state law, if I'm correct, is that the general plan can only be amended a certain amount of times.
4 times a year. I don't know if that applies to charter cities. I don't think it does, but
Yeah.
the general law
Very strict on them.
is 4 times a
Very
year.
strict, yeah.
And so how would a citizen go about approaching changing the general plan for something like the height requirements?
Like something like this. I will say one other thing about it, and then I'll answer your question. Actually, I'll answer your question first, and then I'll say one other thing about it. I think it's just an application in for a general plan amendment. I don't know. I would have to defer to staff. I'm seeing some head shaking yes, so they would apply. But number two is the height requirements are specifically within our housing element, and if we were to reduce any height requirements, it may, not saying it would, but it could affect the density within that specific zone. And currently, the density is not only within our housing element, but also required by state law.
Which ties into the total number of units we're required to have.
What was
Right.
that?
It ties into the total number of units we're required to have.
Correct. So
Yeah.
this is housing element stuff. It's obviously very touchy right now, especially with the state new
Right.
laws.
Right.
It's tough.
I understand that, but when we were talking just yesterday, we were discussing, potential density bonus property, and that we would be able to achieve the density bonus within 3 stories. And so that would, I mean, this is just for future. It's not something that we're going to change tonight, but it's just
Okay.
something that maybe we can move forward with later.
And I don't mean to be a naysayer. It's just we have it in the general plan. The housing element was just approved by the general plan, and the zoning code has to comply with the general plan.
Okay.
All right, 1708 060, Section B3. There's a reference to green belts, which is fine and everything, but except it's not used anywhere else in the code, and I'm wondering if we might want to just change that, or if there's anything preventing us to changing it to be consistent with the chapter to something such as open space and landscaped areas, or is that? Because I don't see green belts defined anywhere in chapter 17, even in the definitions.
No, there's nothing that would prevent you. You can make that change in your motion.
And then also, can we add in that same paragraph a sentence that says, developers are encouraged to provide a 15-foot setback from neighboring houses where possible in existing neighborhoods?
The standard, ma'am, is 5 feet.
Well, I know
This-
that that's the state standard, but as a recommendation, as a design, not an objective standard, but as a design recommendation.
What's the minimum lot width on low residential?
Lot width, sir?
Yeah.
For residential low, it's 50, and then residential medium and residential high is 45.
So theoretically, they could build a 20-foot wide house with 15-foot setbacks. So
And you need 15 in the front and 20 in the rear.
we have larger setbacks from the front than most municipalities, I've noticed.
I think I'm saying it wrong, though, Commissioner Wagstaff, because my intention is that one structure be a minimum of 15 feet from the other structure. And my example that I'd like to give right now is that across the street from me, an infill house was built. They built it to the, 4 feet setback, and the other house was at the old 5-foot setback. And so these two houses are basically looking right into each other's windows. And so that's what I'd like to try to avoid, because if you live somewhere and somebody builds a house next to you, it's going to diminish the value of your home to have that happen. So not that we can enforce it as an objective standard, but just what can we do, excuse me, to protect our current homeowners from having a house built on top of them?
Build 2 stories. That's the answer, honestly. I know it's not the answer anybody wants, but you get a smaller house, leaving a larger setback. But what ends up happening is we squeeze them in tighter and tighter eventually.
Sure, but, I mean, just as far as in reference to this chapter and this moment of setbacks is what we're talking about, and maintaining that issue. Is this am I barking up the wrong tree, guys?
It would make it internally inconsistent, ma'am. You have a standard that is 5 feet, which means that minimum distance between two houses has to be 10 feet.
Yes,
The-
but we have suggestions that also exceed that 10-foot. We have, the standard is not at the standard level is at. Setbacks. Go over here.
Our standard for a single-family house is 5-foot setback on each lot. So the distance between two houses is 10 feet. Putting an inconsistent numerical standard, even though it's in the guidelines as opposed to the standards, makes the zoning ordinance inconsistent and difficult it becomes difficult to implement it from staff's perspective. There are two numbers in two different parts of the code.
I don't see how that's difficult, but.
My worry coming from the building side of this equation is we are not appealing at this point for new residential and home builders to come in, because now we're not with the normal 5-foot setbacks that are required in almost every municipality.
Well, that requirement wouldn't change. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that requirement wouldn't change. It's just a suggested,
So you're saying in the suggestions, put 15-foot setbacks.
yeah, it'd be 15 feet from the closest neighbor when possible. That's all.
With the standard remaining 5 feet.
With the standard remaining.
So you would like it to be suggested that the side yard setback be 7.5 foot. A side yard setback is per lot, not a distance between two houses. So that would be a 7.5 foot side yard setback is suggested. Or is, I guess suggested is the word.
Well, what is the technical term if it's not a setback between one house and the other?
Distance between structures, building separation,
Okay.
another terminology.
Building separations, then. Then how about developers encouraged to provide a 15-foot building separation to neighboring houses where possible?
Required or recommended? Because
Encouraged. Encouraged.
my fear there is we'll push business away.
So you want to leave the 5 feet and then just add a suggestive for
Yeah,
10
as far as
feet?
I understand, the 5 feet is non-negotiable.
Yeah, so the section she's actually referencing is in our guidelines, which is all suggestive material. So anything that we're discussing about the setbacks is all suggestive, and the 5 foot would be the standard enforceable.
Correct.
Understood.
So circling back, my recommendation is to add a sentence into 1708060B3 that states developers are encouraged to provide a 15-foot building separation from neighboring houses where possible.
May I make a
Between-
suggestion? Is that 17.080.050, considering those are the guidelines? So I think there's a distinction between, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt here, but what is considered a guideline, which is a suggestion, versus the actual required setback. The required setback is 5 feet.
Okay.
And the guideline would be in section 17.08.050, kind of where feasible,
I
or something
understand.
like that.
Jen, it's 060 that she's referencing.
So you're looking at like.
I understand.
It's single-family site planning. It's 1708060.
And it is guidelines.
No, the guidelines.
It is guidelines.
It is guidelines, okay.
Yes.
060 is guidelines.
She's referencing the correct section.
And I
have
would
the
recommend,
wrong
ma'am,
number.
if we're going to add that sentence, that it stop after separation.
Okay, forgive me, I have 060 as site planning. for whatever
Yes,
reason.
it is site planning.
Okay, and I have 050 as guidelines.
A 15-foot building separation, period.
Yes.
Okay,
I like that.
so it's just kind of some suggested language.
Yes.
Okay, and then you know that's just a net gain of 2.5 feet on each side, right?
That's fine with me, because when someone's looking right in your window, that 5 feet, it makes a difference.
Okay,
Okay,
yeah.
moving on.
Yep.
Holy moly. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Allowed fencing, C2. Okay. C2. I was thinking this is awfully, there's things I don't like and I do like not about this fencing business. I'm not a fan of the corrugated metal. It's a solar oven. When you're standing in the middle of it, it's reflective of heat, and I think it's inconsistent with the rest of the code, which, if we go to 1708-070 E2, wait, 17. It's a lot of turning pages. 08070. E2. Okay, so I'd like to see in the fencing, I wouldn't mind to see removed sections C2 and C6 and have them replaced with almost exactly the same verbiage from 1708-070 E2, which states, materials to be avoided include metal or aluminum siding, reflective materials and finishes, unfinished concrete block. Exposed wood should be properly finished and stained rather than painted to assure maximum life of coating in the desert environment.
You'd like to eliminate all of the permitted fencing materials?
Yeah, I think it's redundant. And I think, honestly, we could, I don't see why we're restricting chain link and wood, and really what we're coming down to is materials, and why not just use the same finished materials that we're showing in housing? And it would simplify it and be consistent.
If you'd like to eliminate it, please put it in your motion. It is highly unusual to eliminate permitted materials for fencing.
So
in a
let me
zoning
give some
ordinance.
history on this, because I was on the commission when this was brought up. So this was brought up back in 2017-ish, I think it was, something like that. And we had a big, long, drawn-out thing about the discussion on the whole concept of fencing and everything. And, one of the things is, one, bringing our community to look to a higher standard was one of the items, and that's why, if you'll notice in the code, we don't allow chain link on the sides or the front, but we do allow, based on the certain square footage of a lot, we allow it in the back fencing area. The other part is the continual dilapidation of wooden fences all over the town. You can see them. And anybody who is, has been in the desert long enough understands that wood fences, they're the first thing to go with the high winds. They're the first thing to go because of the dry weather dries them out. They crack, they break, these things, and you've got the problems with those. The other part is okay, how do we balance this where somebody who wants to come and replace a fence, but block wall is an expensive alternative. And so the discussion is what do we offer? Well, one was wrought iron fencing, decorative, whatever style, basic wrought iron fencing. The other was vinyl fencing, because vinyl fencing has been proven in the desert. And you can just look at all the large developments now, they have this here. They've been, the builders preferred, because once it's in, it's in. They're not coming back having to deal with disgruntled homeowners. Why didn't my fence last longer than 5 years? to put the vinyl fencing in. The other was the corrugated option, which was, we had a large number of people who said, I'd like to be able to use that as an alternative. I don't think we actually get a lot that do come in, but you'll see some of the more modern projects like to use those. It's a preference, it's the trend in the Coachella Valley, up and down the valley, and I personally am not going to support removing that simply because we don't, number one, Desert Hot Springs is behind the 8 ball on all of our development over most of the cities in this valley. And these are the kind of little things that they look at and go, I want to be able to do this. How friendly are they when it comes to processing things, what's the maximum setbacks and use and things that I can get out of the property, et cetera, down the line. The designers they've got, what does the market allow for? You haven't been on the commission long enough yet, but you will when you get to one of these projects that comes in and says, and Skyborn is going to be the perfect example of one we had. They came in twice and said, we want to change the home design that we had from the original approval to meet the modern terms of what the buyers want. Buyers wanted a certain style, they wanted a certain style fencing, they wanted these things. Corrugated was one of those, and if I recall correctly, over there, he wanted to actually make one of the areas a 55 and older complex section of it where it was not that way. So that was the history of this, and when the commission, unanimously voted for that, because again, code enforcement was dealing with a ton of these issues, and we were seeing the wood was just, I don't know any city in the valley.
But isn't that a code enforcement issue, not a design issue? I mean, really, if the fence is dilapidated, that's a code enforcement issue.
Well, it is. However, you try to mitigate that through the code so we don't have to backfill it with staff.
But aren't we also trying to have a cooler city? Those metal fences create so much heat, and they reflect heat into the neighboring properties. My neighbors across the street with the infill house have that corrugated fencing around, and you go in that backyard, it's like you're in a solar oven. You could literally cook an egg in their backyard on the ground. It's ridiculous. Right. And the neighbors who live next door to them, it's just, I mean, that's why I think that's why we don't have reflective materials on homes and on roofs, because really what it's doing is it's just pushing the heat out into your neighbors or into your own yard, quite frankly. So I would like us to stick with the non-reflective surfaces as it's stated in 1708-070E2. I mean, maybe we can just add that to it so the corrugated metal is not galvanized steel. I mean, what if there's other ways you could do it? You could do the patinaed with rust so that it's not reflecting heat, or you could do other patinas as well that wouldn't reflect the heat.
I think we left the type of material and the reflection aspect of it or the coloring aspect of it up to the property owner. Instead of up to us, leave it up to them.
Except that we don't leave it up to the property owner with any other surface in town. So why would we allow a solar oven to, no, on the side of the, just read 1708-070E2.
We're focusing on fencing now, and on fencing, block wall, I can have brown, I can have blue, I can have gray, I can have yellow. If I have wrought iron, I can have gray, I can have black, I can have brown. If I want to do vinyl, I can have, white, vanilla, or whatever other colors they've got, the same thing.
But you can't have a disco ball fence. You can't have a mirror, shining into your neighbor's yard. You can't, it says right here, materials to be avoided include metal, aluminum siding, reflective material and finishes, and unfinished concrete block. Exposed wood should be finished. I mean, it seems to cover all of those materials and also address the heat element as well.
Well, maybe this thing is on under the guideline suggestions is to say that we encourage that if you're going to use a corrugated type fencing, that you consider this standard. That's a non-reflective, whatever, if there's a term that you've got there, and do that. I don't want to disallow that option of having, somebody to have that choice that says, I've got a modern style home, I want to take down my wood fence that's broken, and I want to put a corrugated metal here, and I want to put block wall here, or a combination of the two. We don't want to disallow them that, because, you look at a lot of the.
Well, then let's compromise and allow it all, but allow the materials to be non-reflective and heat sink items. Sorry. That allows the maximum of flexibility for developers, and it also allows the maximum protection for existing residents.
Commissioners, what if I've stated my opinion, I would not eliminate the list of permitted materials. But if you would like to, if the issue is reflectivity, then if C2D were changed to non-reflective corrugated metal fencing, would that be sufficient? Most of the corrugated metal fencing has some kind of coating on it and is not
Right.
reflective.
I would
So-
be fine with that.
It may be, is it non-reflective? Because it doesn't really feel like it when you're in the middle of it. But I could live with non-reflective, but I don't see why we don't just go explicit and consistent with the rest of the code and add in materials to be avoided, include reflective materials and finishes and
I'm talking about section C2D, ma'am, not section E.
No, I know, I just want the language to be consistent with the other section. I'm not talking about that section, I'm just saying, pull the language from that section, copy and paste it into the fencing.
I'm perfectly fine with with what you had mentioned, the reflective corrugated thing, but we went through so much on the fencing thing that I just don't, and I already know the issues we've had. I've been in the desert long enough in Hawaii. Every city that I know of no longer allows wood fencing. And I know the problems that we had in Desert Hot Springs with it. And I don't want to see that problem happen again. I don't want to create a problem for our code staff or others because of that, when we already create an alternative for them. So, I'm good with this, but I'm not good with that, bringing the wood thing back. I think we've already moved on beyond that thing now.
So Chair Voss, would you then be okay with 2D being non-reflective metal fencing?
Absolutely.
And would you also be amenable to adding a sentence that says materials to be avoided include reflective materials and finishes?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. That's okay. Yeah, because, everything else is going to be that way, so that works.
So, I just want to point out that I did pull some of the fencing language from another chapter in our code, which is the property development standards that you kind of alluded to when you talked about bringing up the fencing thing previously. And some of the language from that section I did leave out. So when you make your motion, I would like you to consider adding a sentence that references as otherwise stated in the Property Development Standards 17.40110, so that we're consistent and cross-referencing. 17.40110.
Okay. All right, moving right along. 170807, number C. I think we can strike that whole second sentence if we don't need it and just simplify it to just say attached single-family dwellings should be designed and located on the lot to enhance their appearance as custom homes, period, end of report. Any objections?
I don't see any issues with it, if you want to include that in your motion.
Okay. And then D, similarly, I think we can just strike that whole final sentence. It's confusing about the human scale. And revise it to read only scale proportion is the essence of good design, variety of design and massing and shapes designed into a building shall be scaled to one another and shall relate to the use of structures as a single-family residence, period, end. Strike the rest. Is that okay with everybody?
I don't see any issues with it.
Okay.
Okay. Oh. Okay. Oh, my goodness. Oh, okay. I wanted to clarify in 1708090 E18, an accessory dwelling unit that is rented must be rented for terms of longer than 30 days. Under no circumstances shall an accessory dwelling unit be eligible for short-term vacation rental permit. And my question is, if a home is already a short-term vacation rental and they add an ADU, how will this be enforced?
So when somebody applies to build an ADU, the planning division requires that they file an affidavit stating that it won't be rented for a term shorter than 30 days. And then additionally, our code enforcement department is aware of that requirement. And it is listed on the short-term vacation rental application as well. So it's mitigated in 3 areas.
And if something like that is going on in the weekend, do we have enforcement that goes on the weekend if there's like a thing at a short term?
I think we do.
Yeah, not to turn this into a short-term vacation rental ordinance, it's obviously part of this a little bit. Yeah, we do have code enforcement, I believe, on weekends. I'm kind of looking at staff as well. I believe we do. Normally, somebody who answers that is somebody from code enforcement. There's nobody here at the moment.
I believe code runs on call on the weekends, don't they?
I think they do, but I don't work in code enforcement, so I wouldn't confirm that with certainty.
Well, either way, however, there's staff, there's somebody available. If there's a nuisance call that's related to anything that they are notified, can respond through the police department, do what they have to do. Perfect.
I just don't want to create a bigger problem than what we're dealing with that. That's all. Okay, 1708110, accessory structures. I'd like to include covered parking or carports in this list of structures. Anybody?
I think they're currently only allowed in HOAs. If I'm not mistaken.
Is that what it is?
So, correct. We only allow carports in a sustainable community that has an HOA. So to add carport as an example of permitted accessory structures, I think would be confusing to staff and as well as residents.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, here we go. 1708160. Oh, where am I? No. Oh my God. 120, the guest homes. Can we just remove the wet bar facilities from that sentence? Is that necessary to restrict?
So I think in removing that, that's one of the distinguishing characteristics that differentiates a guest house between an ADU is the wet bar and the cooking facilities. So I think striking that kind of eliminates the difference between an accessory dwelling unit versus a guest house.
This one. Then 1708160 C, we're referring to parking courts. And I'm wondering if we can change where it says courts to lots, because it's just, it's not been used anywhere else in the chapter, and I'm just wondering for consistency.
Yeah, I don't see any issues with changing it if you want to include it in your motion.
Oh. Well, this one is important, actually. I wanted to see in 1708190, is that it? 180. No, we already went through that. Oh, and maybe it's not, maybe it doesn't belong in this section. Maybe it belongs in the beginning at definitions. But I haven't seen anywhere in this chapter explicit definitions for low income, moderate income, and affordable. And I think as we're seeing transferring of properties from one owner to another, and we have to be consistent with how many units are low income or moderate income or affordable units, I'd like to see that spelled out explicitly somewhere in the document, either in definitions or in this part. And I'm not sure if you have guidance on that, Nicole?
The definition, there is no definition for affordable. Affordable is an opinion, not a definition by HUD. The definitions for, if you want to add definitions for the levels of affordability, then we should add in the definitions section, not here. We should add a definition for very low income household, which is 30% or less of the county median. That changes every year. Low income is 30 to 80%. Moderate income is 80 to 120%, and above moderate income is 120% or more. Those are both the state and HUD standards for affordability, and so that's how they should be defined. That's how an affordable housing project would be rated, is based on the 5 definitions, not just low and moderate.
And that's exactly what I'm getting at, and thank you. And so you think that would go in the definitions in this chapter, or would that go in the?
Definitions for the code as a whole, ma'am.
The zoning code itself. Yeah. Okay.
And is it in the definitions of the zoning code? I didn't see it there.
It's doubtful. It usually is not, but it can be added to yours. That's fine.
That's all my questions, I think.
Okay. Did any other commissioners have anything?
Just
Okay.
one quick question. Did we decide to leave in the list of approved building materials for walls and fences? Or did
Yes.
the way it is now?
Yes. Well, what we added was non-reflective.
Just non-reflective, but
Yeah.
we didn't remove the list of approved building
Correct.
materials? Okay.
Yep, that's the same, just add the non-reflective part of it. Okay, let's see if we have that. Okay, we got that. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and reopen the public hearing just because we have a speaker request form. We want to make sure everybody gets an opportunity to speak. Mr. Russ Betts.
Thank you for opening the public hearing. It's a short comment. I don't want to add to all the thoughtful discussion that's going here, bog things down. But as you're talking about fences, and as I've driven around as a resident looking at them, one of the things that bothered me was not only the materials that were used, but how the fences are being constructed. For example, the metal corrugated can look really nice and artsy and Art Deco or whatever fitted theme of a design, or it could look like somebody just took 2 stakes and put this thing up. The edges are uneven, and I don't know where in the code we go and deal with those sort of issues to where it's not just the materials, but it's how they're constructed. And I don't know if there's in your guidelines now, there's drawings that say here's how a metal fence is to be built. I'm not in favor of wood fences either, but as an example, you could build a wood fence that would hold up. If you made it out all 2x2s and built it just, extremely expensive, it would probably hold up. Maybe not, but anyhow, the point is, it's not just the dog-eared fence that you go down at Home Depot and then the little minimal frame to hold it up. Obviously, that's not going to hold up. And the other thing that comes up is there used to be a standard when you put up a fence. If you're putting up the fence, the finished side would go to your neighbor if you aren't going to do both sides, and the poles holding it up you would look at. Now, I don't know if that was just, common courtesy or what's happened, but now we got people saying, hey, my neighbor just put up this ugly, ugly fence to my side, and all I got is these ugly poles that I'm looking at, the construction side. So there's something in the code that would say a fence must be finished to all, the perimeter of the property. So anyhow, I don't mean to bog you down. I really do appreciate you opening up. This is stuff that's been on my mind every time I've heard this come up with the Planning Commission, and it just happened to be my chance to come down here and raise these few issues. So I really appreciate you opening a public hearing for me. Thank you.
So we'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and then staff, in reference to what was just spoken of, I know that we have usually a pamphlet or a flyer that has installation guidelines. I think this is usually handed out. Is there anything in our code that mentions any of these things? I know there's a minimum standard that's required based on the building code, that the certain footings and these type of things, but do we have anything other than? I'm not sure we can codify it. It's more of a policy, I think, but.
No, so currently the only standard handout items that we have are for block walls. So we don't have standards for fencing.
Okay. Maybe that's something we ought to consider. Maybe talk to Travis or our building official about coming up with a flyer that, people have, this is the recommended standard by the city as a policy. That at least is a good start. And then we can maybe look down if it's something that, is it something that could be, I'm not sure you could codify it, frankly, but at least, because I remember most of them, they got the rotating wheel with a whole bunch of handouts, and these kind of things, and they hand stuff out. But with COVID and different things changed and moving offices to these really fancy offices you guys got now, that everything's digitized and computerized, and you don't want to put things on the walls like pamphlet holders and stuff. So, but you can talk to the building official and say, hey, this was just brought up, and maybe they can come up with something for the contractors to have. Chris, you got something?
I'm just curious how many fence permits are pulled other than new home construction.
I think this year we're up to in the 50s for fence permits so far for 2023.
Thank you.
Seemed like a lot there. Yeah. Oh, yep. Okay, so we've done our discussion. We've got everything. Now we're ready for motion. Who remembered everything?
Mr. Chairman, I can go through the list if the maker will direct to staff. I can go through the list of notations for the comments.
I know she had one other comment, and then we can go through.
I have one other question, and I know that you've answered this, Nicole, so forgive me. But is it unheard of to put the definitions of very low income, and all of that in 1708190 and the definitions there with applicant and the rest?
190 is density bonus, ma'am?
Density bonus, yeah.
Density bonus is pretty much verbatim the state law on purpose because of our requirements for
Okay.
density bonus. So
Okay.
no, I would not, the state didn't put it in there. I would leave it in definitions.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. So, we are looking for a motion.
Sure.
And then, once we have the motion, then staff will,
Mr. Chair, if I may, I know that there's going to be several different items coming up. I don't know if you want to take each one individually or each one, or collectively. I will leave that up to you, you and the Planning Commission. Depending if there's a non-consensus, we might want to take that specific one, individually.
okay. All right, well, let's go ahead and let's take a motion, and then we can always have, before we finalize what the motion is, we can always have a little discussion on it. See what we got. I don't I don't believe that there was, at least from my notes that I took. But let's have a motion and we can see what we got.
Should I try it?
Go for it.
All right. I'm going to make a motion to approve with the following amendments. In to approve Chapter 17.08 of the zoning code, which is the residential districts, with the following amendments being in 17.08060, B3.
Ma'am, would you like to go back to 1708020? If you'll let me read
Yeah, okay, go
my
ahead.
notes.
Sure.
1708020, add after zoning ordinance all applicable state law, including but not limited to, et cetera. That was the first notation that I had.
Yep.
1708060, B3, replace the word greenbelt with open space and landscaped areas, and add at the end of the paragraph, developers are encouraged to provide a 15-foot building separation. 1708060, C2, D, add the word non-reflective, and at the end of the subsection 2, add materials to be avoided include reflective materials and finishes, and as provided in section 17.40.110. 1708070, single-family architecture, section C1, delete the second sentence. Configurations can include architectural treatment to give the appearance of large single-family units, large freestanding units sharing a common garage wall, or as traditional row houses. Same section, item D, as in David, delete the final sentence. Residential structures shall be designed to be within a human scale so as not to overwhelm or dominate their surroundings. And I believe that's it.
There
Oh,
was one more.
yes, you're right. Courts.
1708160,
Courts,
change courts to lots.
throughout that section.
Throughout the section.
Okay. All right. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
So moved.
Okay. We have a second.
I'll second it.
All right. Any final discussion before we vote? All right, then we will go ahead and vote. And
Motion
looks like-
passes unanimously.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And I just want to say, I think I can speak on behalf of the commission, that I want to thank all our wonderful city staff, especially those public works folks, but all of our city staff with the recent storms. What a great job they did. Working 18, 20 hours on the streets, cleaning up our roads for us, opening them up. The alerts that we got both on Instagram, Facebook, and I'm sure other social media, and looking, having the maps of where things were closed and what was not. Just did such a great job on that. It was always up to date, to the best of its ability, responsive. When people made some comments, I noticed there were responses back to them when it was out there. These folks were really working hard doing that. So I just wanted to give it a real special on behalf of the Planning Commission. A big thank you to all of our city staff that were involved in that and continue to be involved in that as we get our roads cleaned up and repaired. And with that, we will adjourn the meeting.